Hey boaters, Keith McGowan here. I am the Outboard Dad here to help you have a better boating experience. Today, we're going to talk about buying a used outboard motor. So please like, subscribe, send me any comments that you have. But what do you want to check out to make sure before you hand over your cash that what you're getting is going to be a good value? Buying a used outboarder can save you thousands of money over a new outboard motor. But it can also cost you a lot of headaches if you don't make these assessments a priority when you're shopping. Had a guy today, Ricky, sent me an email. He took me up on my offer and bought my used outboard buying guide on Amazon and sent me an email with proof of purchase to keith@outboarddad.com and took me up on my free offer, which is for a limited time. If you buy this on Amazon for $20, I will give you a free session over the phone for a half an hour, which is a $250 value. So Ricky had a 250 horse Suzuki and was rigging the motor he bought. He said to me, Keith, I didn't do any of the tests in your book. The motor looked great. I trusted the guy and I bought it, and now I can't get this thing started. So probably not a big deal. It's probably just a wiring issue, and Ricky's going to get back to me and let me know how he made out. But let's get back into the things we need to check before we buy an outboard motor. And make sure you stick around to the end to get my number one tip for what to avoid when you're buying an outboard motor so you can have a better boating experience. First things first, you want to do a visual inspection of the motor, see if it was, beaten up, right? You see the lower unit here of this particular outboard motor had a cracked off skeg. That could cause some damage down the road. If you look in my shop now, there's another lower unit that has a crack right along here. Now we might be able to weld that up, we might not, we don't know, but you have to be careful when you go to purchase that because you want to look at the expense of what the worst case scenario is that you're going to have to pay to get it fixed. And if the seller is saying things like, that's not a big deal, it's not leaking oil, it's not going to be a problem, it will be a problem down the road that you'll have to deal with. So what is the cost going to be of that particular problem? Someone has an outboard for sale and they say, look, it's only going to cost $500 to fix that. Great, you go ahead and get it fixed, and then I'll go ahead and add an extra $500 to the price of this motor because you're telling me you're dropping it down, and then we'll do that. If it's more than that, then you have to pay for that. I'm only paying $500 more. So buyer beware. With your visual inspection, you want to also go through, check your power tilt and trim. Check the motor on the power tilt and trim. Make sure it's not all roached out and rusted up. It may work, but it's eventually going to have to be replaced. One of the key aspects to power tilt and trim, make sure the shafts, the rams, don't have any nicks on them. They may tell you, just put new seals on that. Great, and it might not be leaking right now, but if there's nicks on that shaft, if you look at it closely, sometimes even an inspection mirror you can get behind it with. You can buy those long tube at Harbor Freight with a small mirror, like a dentist mirror on the end of it, and you can get around the back of it and look at it very closely to make sure, because if there's nicks on there, it might not leak now, but you'll have a problem with it later on, and each time you change the seals, you're still going to have a leak there. So, further visual inspection. Make sure there's not corrosion on the mountings. So you'll see where it mounts to the midsection, where it mounts to the swivel bracket, where the steering mounts to it. Usually cast iron steering mounts because it needs to have that strength, and steel bolts that go through there. So you want to make sure they're not rotted out and going to eventually fall off. Pull the engine cover off. Do I see a new fuel filter? Then somebody cares, right? Do I see a couple new fuel lines? Do I see a new fuel pump maybe? Was it just maintained at the marina, or is it something that they take care of on their own? If it is maintained at a marina, getting those records together from all the repairs to show that someone cares. Step 2, one of my most important things you have to do before you buy an outboard motor is a compression check. You want to pull all the spark plugs out, 2-stroke or 4-stroke. You want to put your compression test in there, put your spark plugs in all the wires so you can check to make sure they're all sparking when you're cranking the engine. Crank it enough times to get the maximum pressure out of each cylinder. Record that and make sure it's not more than 10%. It starts getting close to 10%, that motor is going to need to be rebuilt down the road and probably has internal damage. If you're concerned about internal damage, you can always buy one of the cheap, Amazon.com sells a cheap camera. that you can hook up to your cell phone, snake in those cylinders, see what those cylinder walls look like, and get a bird's eye view of what you could have coming down the road. Step 3, we already talked about it a little bit with the lower unit. We want to make sure it's okay. We want to make sure there's no visible, but then we're going to take it a step further and take that drain plug out. If you take that drain plug out, I would even offer to fill it back up for him if he says, oh, I don't want you to drain all the oil out. Okay, then I'll actually bring a quart of oil with me with my little pump, and I'll refill it for you if you're concerned about it, but I want to make sure I know that you just didn't top it off with fresh oil. And I would also check that oil after you've run the motor and turn that prop over a few times, mix up that oil in there, make sure they didn't just put fresh oil in the bottom of that lower unit. Also, your water pump is on your lower unit, so you're probably not going to pull it apart to inspect it if you're just checking out this motor to purchase it, but you want to see that there's some kind of records there that he did replace that water pump. While you're checking the oil, if they won't let you drain it completely, at least get a little bit out of it. See if there's any metal shavings in there. Make sure there's no chunks of metal. Sometimes there's a little magnet on the end of the plug that'll hold on to any steel that gets caught in there. So buyer beware of those things. Number 4, we want to make sure we check the fuel system. How are we going to do that? Well, a sea trial is most important. I talk about it in my used outboard motor buying guide. You may not be able to do that all the time. It really is a critical test to make sure it runs right, because I can look at my fuel system visually. I can see if there's cracked in the fuel line, see if there's a new fuel filter, but you can't tell what's inside unless you get it out on the water and run it to make sure it runs through the paces properly. Number 5, ignition and electrical system. How does the wiring look? Is it corroded, especially the grounds on the block? Are they corroded away? Is the insulation on the wiring starting to fall apart? Making sure that those things are connected properly and well maintained. I had a comment from a guy, I'd rather see oil all over the motor, now not dripping in oil, but a fine coating, and there's certain products you can buy to spray on electrical connections as well as other things on the motor to prevent it from corroding faster. So is it roached out and dried out, or has it been taken care of properly and all your connections are good? So the final test is the sea trial. If you cannot get out on the water, buyer beware. So I sell outboards all the time that I've rebuilt or that I've worked on that came off of boats that guys will come and buy them. They have to offer some type of a warranty if they get it on the boat and they have a major failure. Most used motors, you're not going to have that. So you have to get it at such a discounted rate, or you have to have that trust level with that person that you can do that. Now, at McGowan's Marine, whenever I sell a rebuild, I also offer a 1 hour out on the water with that person to teach them how to break it in. It's usually a 2-stroke motor, because 4 strokes, the break-in is a little different, so that I make sure that that motor gets broken in properly and they have good longevity out of that motor. So these are the things we have to be careful of when we're buying outboard motors. So when we get out on the water, we want to make sure we start smoothly, right? We shouldn't have to crank and crank and crank and choke like crazy and then spit and sputter. Now, if I have an older 2-stroke that's a premix, I may spit and sputter and I may smoke a little bit, and that may be somewhat normal for some of the, especially older 2-strokes that are premixed. But for the most part, it should have a pretty smooth startup and a smooth idle after it warms up. It may take a few minutes to get it warmed up, especially some of the older motors. If it's a 4-stroke motor with an ECM module, fuel injection, shouldn't have that problem at all. It should start up, idle, and ramp up as you go through getting up on plane. So we're going to get this boat out. We're going to putt out of the marina or wherever we're at, and then we're going to get out to some open water, and we want to make sure we can open up, see how many RPMs before we get up on plane, especially if it's a boat that you're looking to purchase. Make sure that that motor matches the boat you're going to put it on, if you can possibly do that. And of course, we always want to check wide open throttle. You'll see on most of these manuals, what is the WOT? That's wide open throttle. What is my RPMs? When I am wide open, I should be on plane, and I should be somewhere around half of the wide open throttle to get on plane. So I should be able to actually ramp down RPMs once I'm on plane. But my wide open throttle, if it's 5,200 RPM and that's what it says, and you're running at 5,800, it may be propped incorrectly. If you're running only at 4,800, then okay, if it's propped incorrectly, that's one thing, but maybe the engine doesn't have the power that it needs to maintain keeping that boat up on plane. So you want to be careful of that. Buying a used outboard motor does not have to be a gamble. You can go through some tests, you can have more surety of what you're getting to have longevity and have a better boating experience. So I put it out there to you now. Send me a comment back. What is your number one tip of what you have to check before buying an outboard motor? And if you're serious about buying an outboard motor or a used boat with an outboard motor, please go to Amazon. You can purchase my guide for $20. You can send me an email with proof of purchase at keith@outboarddad.com, and I do offer a phone session to help you and guidance for a half an hour, a $250 value, to help you have a better boating experience and take less of a chance. You never know for sure what you're going to run into with anything used, but you have a much better chance if you run through these tests. Looking forward to hear from you soon. Have a great day and a happy new year.